Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of Aspire. I'm Vikram. Now, the number of people I come across who tell me about their huge passion, their huge dream for creating a restaurant of their own, I sometimes wonder whether they're thinking of all the patience that is required to run a restaurant, the perseverance that you require, and of course a hard-nosed business sense as well. But the man to ask this question to is perhaps Zorawar Kalra, who in a very short span of time, about 3 years or so, has created 5 brands, and he's got about 14 restaurants up and running already. It's great to have you on the show, Zorawar.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here.
Zorawar, tell me, when you think about the biggest challenge in setting up a restaurant, have you put a finger on what it is?
You know, I think opening a restaurant from the outside comes across as being a fairly, easy business, elementary business. But let me tell you, it is the highest failure rate business on the planet.
So I've heard.
90% failure rate. So 90% of all restaurants that open up typically shut down within a year. And the biggest reasons are undercapitalization, lack of systems and all of that.
Right.
So I think what you really need to look at before you open a restaurant is, are you willing to devote yourself fully into it? So, people say location, right concept. Of course, without a doubt, that's extremely critical to the success of a restaurant. But if you don't have the time to spend towards your business, if it's not your primary focus, chances are you might be part of that 90%, which is actually a very kind of morbid view of things, but honestly, that's the nature of the business.
But Zorawar, you yourself, you didn't specialize in any culinary art as such.
I didn't.
Whatever you know about it, of course, you have a father who would be a great mentor to you. Jakes Kalra is legendary. But a hard-nosed business sense, that's very crucial, I would understand. That's what you really brought to the table. How important was that?
Actually, culinary skills are not necessary to be a restaurateur. If you want to become a chef, of course, without a doubt. I always wanted to play the orchestra, not a specific instrument. A restaurateur plays the orchestra. A chef perhaps will play an instrument. Now, I think without a doubt in our company, the most valued colleagues are our chefs. They are the heart and soul of our company, and we'll always be a chef-driven company.
Right.
That's what we believe in. That's what my father always believed in when he built those wonderful concepts for other people. And I really think that for me personally, having that culinary knowledge was never important because of the way that I grew up. I grew up in a house where since 10 I've been traveling the world with my father. We went a once a year vacation to parts of the world. We ate at hundreds of restaurants in each of these trips. We've done stuff like gone on a Wales and Scotland road trip where we've stayed at 9 or 10 bed and breakfasts, had amazing farm to fork kind of food, which before the term even existed.
Right.
I'm talking about literally the mother of the house running a 10-room hotel, boutique hotel, bed and breakfast to be more precise. Just go to the backyard, collect the vegetables, the fruit, and slaughter the animal and serve it to you for dinner. So I'm talking about ridiculous levels of freshness. My whole, literally, I've been eating this kind of food and studying it from a very up close kind of.
And at some point you realized that this could be great business. Since
the age of maybe pre-teens, maybe 12 or 11, this is all I wanted to do. I only wanted to be in the restaurant business. That's all I thought I would be happy doing. And my whole goal of arming myself with the business knowledge. So I went to the US, Boston, at Bentley University to study my business. And the only reason I did that MBA was to be able to get the knowledge to come back and set up a proper company, not a boutique company. One of the key things I learned, in fact, during that MBA was to not think boutique, to think on a larger scale, to think on a multinational conglomerate.
Right.
Why think of a small mom and pop shop?
How far are we really, Zorawar? Because we haven't seen that really emerge from the Indian scenario as such. You see huge names in culinary arts, whether it's Chef Oberoi of the Taj, who's now setting up his own restaurant. They've kind of created such huge names for themselves. But when you think of a brand name that really you'd like to export to the world, we haven't seen that happen so much. Why is that the case, considering that India has so much to offer by way of variety in food?
I think because the time in which the business actually started booming is still pretty recent.
Okay.
It's about, I would say 14, 15 years old.
Sure.
When you actually had a market big enough to consider of any importance.
But the domestic market is large enough, and perhaps catering to that market itself and satiating the requirements of that market in itself is a huge task. So to think of going beyond Indian borders would kind of seem like a huge ask.
The international market is highly saturated, but the Indian market is fairly nascent. I think only post 2002, 2003 is when you had enough spending domestically to justify wide geographical area in which to open restaurants. For example, only recently are you seeing a 25% or 20 to 25% compounded annual growth rate in the business.
Right.
Which means every 3.5 years, the entire industry is doubling in size.
And where's the growth concentrated? Is it fine dining? Is it the affordable kind? Where are you seeing the most traction?
Definitely not fine dining. Fine dining is very limited, very niche, restricted to A-level cities. Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai, Kolkata. Even now in India, people eat out only twice a week on an average in the urban areas.
Right.
Whereas in parts of Southeast Asia and Europe, you have people eating out 5 to 7 times a week.
Correct.
Which means at least a meal a day on an average.
But are we replicating that a little bit?
Of course, it's increasing.
Now, it is increasing.
A lot of people are now finding dining out as the primary form of entertainment.
Right.
So Indians in general love eating out. We love our food. The quality of the food that exists in this country is very high. We spend more of our gross disposable income on eating out than on any other form of entertainment. To put things in perspective, the food business in India is 40 times larger than Bollywood. 40 times. So it's a ridiculous scale. You're talking about David and Goliath squared. David and Goliath squared. So the size is huge.
Right.
We are
and
growing,
that's
but
the
it's
opportunity that you're trying to
huge
buy
opportunity.
into, right?
It's going to be a $78 billion market by the end of 2017, according to some estimates.
Sure.
It's growing at a ridiculous pace, but it's growing inorganically.
Right.
It's growing all over the place. A lot of it is unorganized, which means that mom and pop shops, the Agrawal sweets on the roadsides, chota dhabas, halwais, all of that stuff. Some of it is, I would say, less than 20% is organized, but that's still a big, huge market.
Yes.
Because the population is so big. Another thing to consider, just our middle class is 350 million people. That's about the population of the United States of America. So only our middle class is that size. Imagine once we tap into the slightly gray areas surrounding the middle class. So I think the prospects are huge. The domestic market is going to be huge.
Yes.
It's just that the consumption trends are improving, but not at the pace that it did in Southeast Asia, for example.
Certainly. So the approach then, as a businessman, as a restaurateur, what does that need to be? Because I'm seeing multiple brands over here. Is that the way to approach, say, this particular market?
Yeah.
The need to kind of create as many brands rather than saying, let's wait, let's kind of see how a certain brand does, see how a certain concept really works.
Yeah.
Why this kind of outlet?
Because it feeds my internal passion. The soul of this company is built around creativity and innovation. And if those two nuances are fulfilled, then we feel happy waking up every morning and jumping out of bed. The day that I become a cookie cutter concept and I start opening only Farsi cafes across the world, which I will, the day I'm only doing that, I probably will be bored, personally, and so will my team. And that whole creative culture and environment and habitat that we built within massive restaurants will perhaps wither away and die.
So are you saying that creating 5 brands, whether it's a Farsi, a Masala Library, a Masala Bar, a Papaya, and a Made in Punjab right now, all of that is fueling a passion that you have? You would get bored, but how much business sense does it make to have as...
Yeah, so that's a very good question. Predominantly I'm a businessman. Obviously I think with my heart, but mainly with my brain. And if all of these concepts were not viable, I would not even get into them. I haven't, for example, gotten into Turkish restaurants or Lebanese restaurants because I know they won't necessarily make a lot of money. I love Japanese food more than anything else after Indian, and I have not gone and opened a pure sushi place. Although my Papaya restaurant has sushi as an integral element, it's not the only thing we serve. Right. So everything that we do is predominantly fueled by a business prospect.
Okay.
There has to be a viability, there has to be a return on investment. That's what the whole MBA taught me, the IRRs. We look at IRRs, and most of our restaurants, Knockwood, let me touch this multiple times, are over 100%. So we typically are able to get a full return on our investment under a year in most restaurants, and I don't think there is any business in the world that can do that consistently over a long period of time.
But I have a feeling that certain brands do your IRR, when it comes to that, they do a better job than your fine dining restaurants. We'll talk about that in terms of the ideation, in terms of the kind of drill that you go through before you decide to go with a new brand. We'll find out how you've done it with the existing brands and what's cooking as well. We'll do that right after the break. To stay with us. Welcome back to this edition of Aspire. We're in conversation with Zorawar Kalra. Now, Zorawar, I wanted to understand, like I was saying just before the break, how you approach a certain brand. You've thought of a concept, but what work goes into whether or not you're going to push everything that you've got business-wise into it?
So obviously, I think one of the key strengths that I personally possess is, I have a pulse on what the Indian people want. A little bit of gut instinct and a lot of market research.
Okay.
We do a lot of market research. We don't employ companies to do it, but we do it internally.
Give me an example, like papaya, for example.
Exactly. So like papaya, I knew that in Bombay, there is a huge love for Asian food. But sushi was very limited.
Yes.
And I knew that sushi by itself is never going to be able to run a full restaurant for long. It won't do crazy numbers. But as an add-on, it can do well. Secondly, I found that there was no innovation. There were great Asian restaurants and Oriental restaurants, but they were not innovating. The same old Purana style of, food. Tasty food, but no innovation.
Right.
I thought of pulling a farzi on Asian food. So basically what I did was I took Asian food, I revolutionized it, modernized it in a way, and I introduced molecular in a sensible manner. And I introduced a little bit of theater, the little bit of creativity from our chef, involving multiple cuisines, fusing them together to create a hybrid cuisine, which is there for all to see. So we could have just sold sushi, but we have a modern sushi section in the restaurant, which sells the regular sushi, which outsells the regular sushi 2-to-1.
And sushi, when you kind of think about it, not a huge market. Some would even call it niche. But then again, you're making sushi for vegetarians as well. And I've tried this at Papaya, and I thought it was simply outstanding. It's just that one hadn't kind of thought that this is something that you would like. So to get people to open up their minds to different kinds of food and then going away happy and then wanting to come back, that's where the trick lies.
Absolutely.
So is this much more of gut instinct, or it's something that you've honed over a period of time? You've kind of seen how people react? Because there is a lot of change in the menu that I see from time to time as well, which needs to be integral to the restaurant business. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. So change is absolutely imperative, because people get bored. And people have a lot of options. There are a lot of restaurants opening up, a lot of them shutting down too, but a lot of restaurants coming up, eating part of your pie. And that's fine. That's competition. It makes us stay alert, makes us stay focused. But I think initially, when I started Farzi Cafe or Masala Library, it was a lot on gut instinct, and it was a punt. Right. It was a risk. But after seeing the success of these, I realized that there is a hidden formula underneath all of this. I can't share that formula, because that formula actually has a lot of parts to that equation. But
what are the parts? At least tell me the parts.
You have to innovate. I think the most important part is innovation. And the second thing is you have to have a value-centric proposition.
Okay.
You made me give away half the equation, but anyway, I'm not going to give you too much more, but there are 2-3 things more that come as part of this whole equation that results in success. So X plus Y plus Z plus A plus B equals success in the restaurant business. I've told you X and Y, A, B, C are 3 more aspects that are
the secret ingredients. Let's call them that.
Yeah, because honestly, if you really think about it, they're not even that hidden. It's low-hanging fruit, but sometimes we try and reach for the taller branches when there's a fruit hanging right in front of our faces.
Sure.
So I think you have to figure out a combination of various things that results in the successful restaurant concept.
Right.
Starts with gut instinct, eventually results in studying the market. Just study. Go and spend a year. Any of the concept that I've opened, I've spent at least a year thinking about them. Masala Library, I was thinking since 2006. It's the only fine dining restaurant in India that is till today booked out for several weeks in advance. The Delhi one, you can't get a tip. I get calls from ministers on a daily basis.
Right.
On a daily basis, because I'm in Janpat all day, all of them live around anyway. The kind of calls I've gotten from Masala Library, Delhi and Bombay.
So to reach that point, Zorawar, it's important to understand, because when you're setting up your brand, the investment that it's going to take, how much you're going to put into decor, how much into manpower, service, where is the accent going to be, and the kind of food that you're going to create. All of that needs to be thought through. Does it happen at a holistic level, and how much of mentoring happens with your dad, who's had this huge amount of knowledge with him when it comes to culinary arts? How do you put it together?
So basically what you're talking about, the science of the business plus the creative and the art aspect of business. So science plus art equals to a restaurant successfully running for long periods of time. So the science part is, really looking at numbers. I firmly believe that the restaurant business is perhaps the toughest business on the planet. It's a very dynamic business.
Right.
So you have to be very dependent on systems. So that's how we do it. We work on very strict operating ratios. So we build a restaurant, we do a feasibility study, we figure out it's going to do X amount of sale. So our salary cost cannot be, for example, above 12%. Our food cost cannot be over 30%.
Right.
Our occupancy cost cannot be more than 15%. When you do all that math, you arrive at a number. If that's not making any sense, then you either tweak the ratios or you don't open there.
Right.
So that's the science part. You have to be very numbers driven. You have to be scientific.
And you must have had situations when you see the numbers going for a toss. What do you do then? There's a lot of course correction at that time. How do you kind of course correct?
So knockwood hasn't happened that often, so it's something that I have less experience with. But there have been instances where we've been able to radically have a restaurant go up. So it was performing at below competence levels, not losing money, but at below expected levels, and we've been able to, through certain infusions, have it go up. So first thing is look at the low hanging fruit, look at where you can cut costs, get your food costs under control, because that's a major leak. Put 10 people looking at the daily issuances of that restaurant. Look at your salary costs. Are they going crazy high? If they are, then is your lunch business doing well? If it's not, shut down for lunch. Don't open for lunch.
Sure.
At least make the restaurant self-sustaining and profitable. Then you focus on revenue, because if there's no revenue, what are you going to do, right? You can look at where have you gone wrong, study the feedback. We take our feedback very seriously. We analyze it every day. Every guest that comes to our restaurant, if they leave their number on our feedback forms, is called the next day. Because in the restaurant business, you're only as good as your last meal.
Sure.
So
I think social media catches on to yes, it makes a huge difference.
Double-edged sword.
Yes.
I love it and I hate it. I love it because it helps me reach out to millions of people with very low ad spend, with a very low amount of actual.
It must have brought down your marketing costs.
Huge. Now it predominantly forms 80% of our marketing budgets.
Right.
A Twitter guy with 20,000, 30,000, 50,000 followers comes to my restaurant, loves the food, takes a photo, tweets about it. I just reached 50,000 people and I actually made money because the guy actually paid for his meal. So actually it's beautiful.
Yeah.
But there are also certain negatives. People misuse it, people lie, people threaten you about it. So it is, two-sided. But I think the advantages are far more than the disadvantages, and I think social media has been a boom for the restaurant industry. Earlier it used to take you a month to spread the word, now it takes you a day.
And talking about the lovely food, we are at a masala library. We are going to tuck in to some of the great fare that you have over here, but we'll do that right after this small break. And of course, we'll find out about your passions as well, what drives your business, because I understand you're heavily into driving and racing cars. We'll find out more about that right after this. Do stay with us. Welcome back to this edition of Aspire. Now here we are at Masala Library, and I'm kind of taking my first helping of masala shrooms. Now Masala Library, like Zorawar has been telling us, and something that I've experienced as well, is all about, concept. It's about tweaking Indian cuisine as we know it. How much part of this entire exercise have you been to kind of come up with? Because at one level it's just the concept that we need to do something with Indian food and we want to make it global, but when it comes to real creation of dishes, are you involved?
Fully involved. I think we must have done about 150 different dishes when we started this restaurant. It was the first one we opened in my company, Massive Restaurants. I think this opened on October 5th, 2013. And I was planning this restaurant since 2006, but I knew India is not ready. I went for my honeymoon to Spain, to El Bulli, at that time the #1 restaurant in the world. The hardest reservation. It was open only for 6 months and you had to book a year in advance. Before even going to Spain, I called them and I said, listen, and this was in July end, somewhere down, and we were supposed to go on 15th of August. He actually started laughing at me. He said, you do realize you have to book a year in advance. Here you're calling me 20 days before you're going to show up. I said, listen, I'm from India. I'm coming there for my honeymoon. And I happen to be related to this man called Jigs Kalra. Please read up about him. Check your reservations, see if you have space available. The maitre d' said, sure, let me get back to you. He obviously did his research. He figured out who my father was. And through that little link, I was able to get a reservation.
The doors opened.
The doors opened. I changed my other plans to kind of make sure that I was there for that meal. It was an amazing experience. I saw Molecular for the first time and I thought, I must do this for Indian. But there was no way that we could have done it at that time in 2006 with Indian food, because, Molecular was new to the world, let alone in India. The seed of the idea that was planted at that time. In 2013, when I opened it, we actually worked on 150 different dishes before we chose the 50 or 60 odd that came onto the menu. And we spent, I think, about 5 or 6 months on the menu. And conceptualizing happened even maybe a year. So a year process before we actually opened the restaurant. In that time, we were involved in every single aspect. The finest of finest details were looked at because this was a big risk.
And this is the thing, that any time that you're creating a new concept, there is going to be a certain amount of risk that's associated with it.
Inherent.
Yes.
It's inherent to business.
Yes.
No risk, no reward.
That's true. I also understand that you are very passionate about driving cars, and there is a certain amount of risk that you take on when you're driving cars at that pace. And I know that you go around Wood Circuit a lot in your Porsches. Tell me, are there any corollaries that you draw in the art of driving fast and running a business?
Absolutely. The biggest thing you got to do in business is to trust your team and your colleagues and your people. The same thing in driving fast cars. You have to trust in your machine. You have to go all out for that long straight at 300 kilometers per hour. And on that turn, I think it's the 6th turn on Wood Circuit, it's a hard U-turn right. From 300 odd down to 150 is the fastest I've ever taken that U-turn. You have to depend on that brake. You have to assume that when I push that pedal, the brake will do what it's supposed to do and stop the car. Same way you do business. You assume that those various parts that form the entire machinery of business are in perfect harmony. They're all well oiled. They speak to each other, they communicate with each other, and they're working in tandem to get to the final result of making a restaurant.
So what is the final result that you've set yourself? Because I know that there is a target that you're working towards, a 200 crore rupee business, an annual turnover. Is that what you're looking for? How exactly are you going at this?
So, 200, we're already going to be 200 by the end of December.
Right, that's what I hear.
At a run rate of 200.
Exactly.
So our goal is to be a listed company in 3 to 4 years. We want to be a large scale company that does innovative stuff. It does it on a wide geography, and it does it with heart and soul, but does it in a professional, corporatized manner so that you can have Indian food firmly on the global palate forever.
And what's going to drive your growth? I know that the beverage business that does so much better in Dubai as well, you've gone with a Farsi Cafe. I'm sure that plays on your mind as well, because at one level is this passion that you're working towards to take Indian food to the world. At the other level is the business sense that says, oh, it's a beverage business that does so well, so have a little bit of spike in it, a little bit of differentiator, and then you have a good business going. So what's going to drive it?
I think it's going to be a combination, but definitely what really drives us every day is this love and sense of responsibility that we have towards Indian food. I think it's up to us. No foreigner is going to come and promote our cuisine. Why can an Indian restaurant not be one of your top 3 dining destinations when you go to France, or when you go to Australia, or when you go to the US? The whole world opens restaurants in Dubai. It's a very serious gourmet dining destination city.
Right.
We open a Farsi Cafe there, and it's the talk of the town. Sheikh Mohammed has been there. The Prince has been there multiple times, which is one of the hardest things.
What you're saying is there is huge potential.
Huge. I'm going to open 3 more.
Right.
In Dubai. I'm going to go to London. I'm going to open in London.
So you see, like Italian cuisine, you see Indian
Absolutely.
cuisine.
That's the example I
take
gave.
that place. Yeah.
Indian, Italian, Chinese, in that order.
Yes.
Indian, Italian, Chinese is the way I want the popularity to be across every major city in the world, and it's up to me to do it. I cannot serve katoris of dal with a swirl of cream on top and expect people to like it. Sure, it tastes great, but there's no innovation, there's no beauty, there's no internationalization. You need to do that. I'll give you the example of Japanese. Nobu made Japanese what it is today. Japanese before that was very conservative, limited to niche restaurants, and it was not that popular. Nobu came in the early 90s. Yes. He did this fusion bit. He made suddenly Japanese the coolest cuisine, and it remains today one of the coolest cuisines in the world.
That's right.
So the top, most expensive, most beautiful, most successful restaurants in the world are Japanese.
So there is a model, there is a kind of, a precedent that's right before you, and you're obviously well on your way to be able to achieve some of these large goals that you've set for yourself. We wish you great luck, Zorawar.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed, and with the show that you've got going for yourself at MasterChef, we wish you great luck as well, and we hope to see you much more on BTVI with all the stories that you're going to generate in the world of culinary art. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much. Such a pleasure.